A woman not born of the Westwalk steps through a broken arch of stone and thunder, leather, iron, and a glare of impossible instruments upon her brow. Where the winds of Middle-earth once whispered of one turning fate, now another hand lays claim to the maps and keys of destiny. She comes as one who measures angles of ruin and reads the old geometry of tombs. She comes with the sure foot of one who has sprung from cliff to crypt and knows the taste of cold stone upon her palms. The air that greets her tastes of iron and rain. Ancient and endless cobwebbed echoes curl about her like threads of some long-forgotten loom. Her boots leave prints upon dust that has not known a new tread in ages, and the earth listens as if a heart has begun to beat again beneath its ribs. The remnant halls crouch upon a shoulder of the world where few maps dare to trail their ink. Here are lintels and pillars older than the speech of men. Here are halls that have weathered the slow attrition of seasons and the sharper gnaw of greed. Somewhere in the deep, a river runs like a silver thought, and the roofs have fallen and become gardens for moss and the pale grasses of shadow. Statues stand with faces worn, as if weeping bas-reliefs tell tales that only the stones remember. A very old cold clings to corners where the sun forgets to enter, and within that cold the newcomer moves as if in her element. For she is mistress of places that demand a steady hand and the courage to pry loose secrets from sleeping mouths. Her instruments are like little suns upon the brow, glass and brass in strange arrangement, a lens and a needle that gleam in response to hidden things. She carries light that does not hunger the way a torch does it scourges the dark, revealing not only what is but what once was. Around her waist hang clasps and belts, trinkets of iron and bone. A harness bears the weight of tools and of memories from a life cut with edges foreign to this world. She speaks seldom, but when she does the sounds are terse as an archer's command. Her eyes are the eyes of someone who has seen cities fall, who has walked with the dead to close their eyes, and with the living to open doors that would not be opened by pity alone. It is in a chamber of the remnant halls that the first portent appears. A glyph of light upon the floor, cast from her instrument, awakens runes whose meaning is braided with the speech of the Eldar. The runes flare, reluctant as embers stirred, and the air grows dense with a music like a distant bell. Where once the runes lay cold and unread, now they answer through the stone with a low murmur, and dust shudders like an old curtain. That sound reaches farther than the ear. It travels through root and rock. Through memory, it is a signal on a thread that binds those things appointed to one another. Far beyond that hall, upon other high places and in other hidden places, there are lights that flicker in answer. A ranger's keen glance in the wilds, the winds gossip across river and dale, the slow opening of an eye in the city reluctant to sleepward, is a thing that can be borne by wind and by worry. And so it is that Aragorn, son of Arathorn, who walks with the look of the kings he will be, comes first upon the path of sentience. He knows ruin and the spoor of travelers. He has a way of listening to the land that makes him often arrive before a deed is fully done. When he steps into the maw of the hall, his hand rests upon the hilt at his hip, not with the manner of one who expects battle as a sport, but as one who prepares to meet the truth. He pauses and studies the woman where she stands like an artifact newly unearthed. Her clothes are not of the East nor the West. They are stitched from the lives she has led, patched and restitched where fate demanded. Her tools gleam like relics he does not know how to name. She looks back at him with no lesser curiosity. Legolas of the woodland realm arrives in a whisper, his hair like a thread of pale light among darker greens, his arrows notched as if the very air could be loosed. Elfcraft sees the uncanny and wraps it in song. He hears the odd cadence in the composite instruments, and the way the woman moves with almost uncanny balance. His eyes, keen to the hue of living things, register the way she does not bear the smell of decay, but carries it like a cloak, not eaten by it, but in constant negotiation. The elf's bow does not lower, he remains poised between wonder and wariness. At his side stands Gimli, son of Gloin, hatchet bright and beard as a banner. The dwarf snorts, for dwarves do not like strangers in their old places unless coin or quarrel is at hand. Yet even his mirth fades in the face of her audacity. He senses in her fingers a kind of kinship with the rock, a touch that the stone accepts rather than recoils. From Gandalf comes like a shadow that wished itself light. His staff touches the floor and the dust remembers. He smiles as one who has known many comings and is not surprised by the shape of new things that arrive to pull at the skein of destiny. Where others have eyes that warn, he has a memory that weighs. Before he speaks, the hall attends, for wizards weigh the world differently, and his voice is like a finger tracing the map of some answer. He regards the woman not with the curiosity of youth, but with the tempered interest of a seer who counts possibilities and reads the tilt of the scales. Her instruments, he knows, are not of this age. Magic and craft proceed in parallel in all worlds. Sometimes they meet, and sometimes they wound each other. He watches for the first sign of which manner this meeting will choose. From the east comes, unseen, alarm the stones that guard the remnant hall's taste of intruders. From fissures crawl things of old malice, small as rats but bold as thieves, creatures that have nested in the bone of the hall and now, awakened by the light, scurry to defend their hoard. The woman does not startle. She sets a foot upon a threshold, and the catch of a spring sings beneath her boot. In a motion both graceful and merciless she swings low, a rope unwinding and a blade singing light. She moves like music whose rhythm has been practiced in darker arenas. The small host of creatures breaks like surf upon the shore of her intent. There is no blood gloating, only the clean efficacy of a hand that has known when to spare and when to end. The fellowship, if such a name is yet theirs, surveys these deeds in a hush. They see in her not merely a fighter but an intelligence that reads spaces as others read faces. Her maps are not vellum, but memory. Her keys are not all made of iron. She has for a long time prized things forgotten. The hinge beneath the floor that opens upon a truth, the soft place in a wall that yields at the right pressure. She has, in other words, all those small technologies of survival that men call craft and heroes call skill. Each member feels, in their own way, the strange tug of recognition. Aragorn senses a kindred courage. Legolas sees a dexterity that rivals any of his forest-born. Gimli recognizes the reverence for stone. Though in different hands, Gandalf hears the cadence of a mind that will not be easily boxed by prophecy. There are yet portents more private, small gestures that speak louder than trumpets. The woman lays a palm upon a broken frieze, and the pattern there responds with a faint warmth, as if something deep and old had received a summons meant for a guest with a particular kind of key. She speaks then, and her voice is stripped of accents so that it falls like a blade of plain meaning. Her words are few. She says she has come for maps. She says she has been pulled through places of lightning and niches of the world to this hinge of earth. She says she knows of a ring, of fires and shadows, and of a doom that must be measured out. Her eyes do not boast of knowledge. They hold the weary glare of one who has read many maps and found in them more ends than beginnings. Gandalf's gaze shifts, and in that tilt the hall hears the slow turning of a wheel which has almost been set in motion. He knows these words as threads of a larger cord. His mind assembles them into a pattern that is both familiar and strange. The wizard's voice is then, a low thing and grave, as he asks of her from whence she came and by what manner she speaks of rings. She answers not with tales but with maps, a small folded parchment of a material made not of paper, but of something akin to treated hide, marked with lines no one present knows how to follow. Along the edges of that parchment are symbols that shimmer in the light of her instruments, and when she lays them upon the floor, the runes of the hall leap like sailors to a new star dot. It is a strange concord, the old world acknowledging the new. Yet even as curiosity blooms, a shadow of fear coils within the breast of each watcher. To bring strangers into the weave of destiny is to risk the tearing of threads, to enlist aid is to barter with fate. The Lady of Other Worlds carries with her instruments that can pry open more than coffers in wrong hands. They might undo the very bindings that keep malice asleep. Aragorn's hand tightens upon Anduril, not as threat to the woman, but as vow to the road. He steps forward with the measured stride of one who will yet be king, and says nothing. For sometimes the silence of a king is the authority of counsel. Thus the remnant halls bear witness to the first accords. A brief weighing, a test of skill, a sharing of maps, and a glance that marks the forming of a bond. The woman does what she knows to do. She measures, she marks, she prepares a line of inquiry. She will not be satisfied with tales. She wants doorways, and where they are closed, she will make them open. The fellowship sees in her not only a stranger, but the press of something inexorable, an outsider with the devil's patience, and a scholar's hunger who has stepped into the age-old struggle, as if it were merely another ruin to solve. Whether she is ally or omen remains unspoken. Outside, the wind moves through the broken arches and carries the distant cry of ravens inside. The stones listen and settle, as if the world is a book whose next chapter has been, at last, lifted by a bold and uninvited hand. The hall grows quieter, and beyond its gates the shadow stirs, taking measure of this new light. The halls lay vast and hollow, a cathedral of stone where echoes kept counsel with themselves. Light from her torches fell like captive suns, burning the dust into stars that trembled and died. Lara moved as one who had learned to read the bones of places. There was a practiced hush to her breath, and a deliberate patience in the angle of her shoulders. Not every silence in Middle-earth was benign. Beneath the weight of ages lay old sorrows, old traps, and older guardians, whose wills were not broken by the fall of kings. She had entered these remnant halls on purpose, a wayfarer from another craft and age, with boots of leather and steel, and an eye as unblinking as a hawk's. Behind her, ragged fires in the distant halls stained the archways with blood-red, and the faint chorus of men and elven voices braided with the whisper of old stone. They had spoken together in hushed fear and hurried hope, when the shadow of a strange woman had been noticed at the edge of the outer gates. Some called for watchmen, others for counsel, yet a few only stared as if at an omen. Now the omen stood beneath the soaring ribs of the hall, untamed hair braided with trinkets, a relic satchel at her hip full of curious devices that hummed like distant bees. Gimli's shadow met hers first, stout and suspicious, the axe at his hip a promise and a question in equal measure. He smelled of iron and mountain, his beard braided with small tokens, and his eyes narrowed as if to catch a lie in mid-flight. Legolas glided like a reed-born thought, a pale smile that did not touch his eyes. Bow resting against the curve of his shoulder, he watched her hands more than her face. Boromir stood farther back, chest like a shield, the weight of Gondor on his shoulders as visibly as any male, his voice low and wary when he spoke. Sam stood with the steadier sort of perplexed loyalty. His hands clenched about the strap of his pack. His face was open and furrowed like a child's weathered by work. Aragorn, taller than the rest yet worn as any man, kept his hand near the hilt of his sword, not because he distrusted her, but because he distrusted the ease with which fate arrived dressed as a stranger. Frodo stood by Aragorn's side, small and solemn, the shadow still a bruise at the edge of his sleeve. His fingers toyed with the rim of a coin he had kept from another world. Gandalf lingered in the gloom like a slow-burning thought. Staff in hand, gray cloak whispering, he watched not only the woman but also the way the hall received her, for that was to measure destiny. Her voice when she spoke was not loud, it was a thing that moved the air as if it had weight and consequence. "I seek knowledge," she said, "and the old stones answer in riddles. I seek an instrument and a company. The road that calls me is older than my maps." Gimli spat. "A dwarf's assessment is often done with a sound that resembles metal. We do not give our halls for taking," he declared. "What instrument does a woman from afar need with our kin?" She smiled without humor. "Not to take, but to mend," she said. "I seek a relic lost in a stronghold farther west. It remembers a hand that was not made to be stayed by a holdfast or a King Boromir's expression. Titan Gondor's quarrels were close and never fully laid to rest. Your words are fair, but fair words do not keep the watch. Who will swear the oath of this company? By whom shall we be bound?" She regarded him with the steady look of someone who had bargained with ghosts and survived. "By a promise that keeps with deeds," she said. "By the blade that will not lie. By the road itself." At those words Gandalf's staff hummed faintly as if it knew the shape of the road. There are roads, he thought, that carry oaths like seed into deep earth, sprouting later into trees whose roots bind nations. He stepped forward, old authority soft on his tongue. Words may be thin, yet an old gray wizard has seen words grow. If this woman has the courage for her craft, then let us learn the measure of her aims. A silence fell that was more like a listening than an absence. Even the torches seemed to draw breath. Lara unrolled a map, not of parchment but of thin metal and glass, etched with lines that shimmered and moved when she touched them. When she set it upon the stone, the lines glowed like rivers and the halls leaned toward it as if they too wished to read. The company bent, reluctant and intrigued. She pointed with a finger smudged with oil. "Here," she said, "beneath the fell of Ironmark. There is a vault and within it a device that once turned tides. It was made by hands that learned from Star something. I do not know its name here." Legolas lifted his chin, eyes like thin moons. "Ironmark lies near the borders of Moria," he said. "There are tales of machines and of those who would bend them to their will. Orcs and worse dwell there now." A murmur threaded the hall. The notion of a machine that turned tides was a heresy told as a rumor. It set nerves to jangling and hope to quicksilver. Gimli's hand went to his axe. "If orcs hold it, we shall have to take it, whether for kings or for the halls of dwarves. No machine shall be left to feed their hunger." Sam frowned. "Machines make holes in good soil for growing. If it turns tides, what will it do to our waters? To the Shire streams?" There was laughter, short and brittle, from the darker seats. Laughter is often the first defense of small men faced with strange sorrows. Gandalf's eyes were narrow. "We sail into storms we do not understand if we follow this path. Yet the storm may be upon us regardless. There are threads that bind the fate of many lands to cut. One without learning of the rest would be folly." Her hand brushed the map and a single point flared. A faint pulse of silver at the heart of Ironmark. "It is guarded," she said. "Guarded by metal-bound things and those who worship the sound of engines. They will not surrender it for oaths." Boromir's hand tightened on the pommel of his sword. "Then we must bring force enough to make them hear us," he said. "Force with honor." Aragorn stepped forward, his voice a low chord. "We go as one company if we go. Not for crowns nor for gold, but for the balance that men and elves and dwarves share. If this device alters the tide of battle or sea, then it touches us all." Frodo's small voice rose like a thread. "If it is taken by those who wish to rule, our songs will become dirges. We cannot let that happen." Sam swallowed hard. "If we go, Mr. Frodo, I'll carry the pots and the ropes. No machines getting past my cooking." There was a murmur of assent. Humor lightened the weight, even if only for a moment. The thing became more than a stranger's quest. It altered into a cause. Gandalf's gaze rested on Lara with a peculiar mix of caution and curiosity. If you bind yourself to us, you bind yourself to the old promises as well. There are debts to call and answers to give. Will you swear to bear that burden? Lara's hand closed into a fist. The gear at her hip made a small, resigned noise as if some unseen thing had adjusted to a new plan. I have sworn to the road before, she said. I will swear again, by whatever oaths you honor here. Gimli grunted approval. An oath in a dwarf's ears is a clanging bell. Legolas inclined his head with an almost invisible gesture, and Boromir's jaw eased. A pact was not a single word but a weaving of words, signs, and the slow testing of hands. Gandalf named the terms swift passage, the sharing of counsel, the defense of the innocent, the refusal to use the device for dominion. Each member, one by one, spoke his name and his vow. When it came to Lara, her vow was short and sharp, like the crack of a whip that binds oxen to plow. I will not seek crowns for myself, she said. I will not keep what I take when it harms the free. I will follow the road until the device is dead or ours. They passed beneath the lintel, as though entering the throat of the world, a threshold of stone older than songs, whose carving had been worn by rains that no living man remembered, and by hands that did not trust light. A breath of colder air issued from the dark, carrying with it the scent of earth and old copper, of wax and the faint reek of iron, where time had not yet consumed the taste of tools. The remnant halls closed upon them, and the daylight dwindled like a coin sunk into a deep pool. Lara Croft moved first, not because she wished to be first of the fellowship. There were leaders here enough, but because her feet were used to the hunger of ruins. Her boots made no needless sound. Straps and leather, and the gleam of things bound at her hip caught the glimmer of Gandalf's light in small, alien flashes. To the men born under the sky of Middle-earth, her accoutrements seemed like relics of some stranger craft. Twin staves of metal etched with small teeth, coils of thin rope like spun starlight, a blade whose haft bore the scars of many deserts. Yet there was about her a calmness that was not of the moment. She carried knowledge like a torch, and where her hand passed, the runes upon lintel and lintel answered as if they had been waiting for that particular touch. Gandalf walked beside her, tall and gray, his beard loose and his staff radiating a gentle, wary heat. He had seen many wanderers who spoke with the dead voices of stone, hobbit-likes who hummed subterranean tunes, men who pledged coin to caverns, dwarves who never left their forges. But he had not seen a woman whose eyes measured a trap the way worms measure the grain. He did not speak much. His mind kept the ledger of things vast and small. Aragorn's hand rested upon his sword hilt as he watched her, measuring a companion by the metal of deeds, not by birth or song. Legolas' sight pierced farther. He frowned once, as if the elven sight found a note dissonant in her, something that shimmered beneath the outward garb. Gimli's beard trembled with a joy not wholly like mirth. He thought of kin and of other minds, and his voice was a low rumble, approval and challenge braided together. The halls themselves were of a kind that spoke of a patience older than empires. Pillars rose like the ribs of a buried beast, each one engraved with spirals and stars and figures that reached for shapes of trees and towers. Between the pillars lay chambers whose floors rose and fell in little terraces, and on the terraces lay the work of 1,000 hands, mosaic and inlay, the bands of craft that recorded deeds in metal and stone. Here and there, tapestries sagged like the skin of ages. A great map was set into the floor, the inlay of rivers and roads like threads of onyx and silver. Those who looked upon it felt their own feet remember the ways of the world. These halls have remembrance, murmured Gimli, and his voice was full of the hunger of kinship. This stone keeps the names of those who wrought and wore it. It keeps more than names, said Gandalf, sharply. It keeps caution. Few come here who bear life as an offering. Lara crouched before a narrow slab in the wall and traced with a finger lines that the others only saw as scratches. Her hand was sure. Runic marks folded into a cipher, nuances of angle and stroke that in other lands had an entirely different accent. She hummed, a small sound like a struck glass, and then spoke softly, as if teaching the stone to remember its own speech. "This chamber is a gate without a door," she said. "They sealed it with music and lockwork." The locks answer to wait and whisper. Boromir bristled. He had crossed battlefields where gates were broken by axe and horn. He had no faith in riddles. "Then break it," he said. But there was no malice in him, only the blunt hunger of a captain who would see a road open for his people. "You do not break a thing when you can understand it," Legolas answered. Some doors were made to guard the living from what was kept within. Lara's fingers found a little hole beneath the slab, and with the deftness of one who had spent her life making the secret yield to curiosity, she drew forth a tiny, spune-iron key, no larger than a man's thumb. It was a thing of foreign make yet familiar shape, and when she held it to the light there were filigree lines like the roots of a tree. She fitted it to the lock, which yielded with a sigh as of old metal relaxing. A panel shifted with a whisper, and a single lantern, long dead, burst into pale blue flame. At that sound the air beneath them moved. Beneath the floor, for the stones in these halls were cunningly layered, something uncoiled like a held breath. The floor trembled in a slow passing, as if a leviathan had changed position far below. Distant in the galleries, a metallic note sang, a tone like the striking of a bell of glass. Dot from the shadowed corridors came forms that were not wholly of the earth nor wholly of the old art. They were statues wrought to guard, tall figures in bas-relief that stepped down from their carvings, shifting with the rustle of old mortar. Stonewardens they called them in the old cant, the craftsmen who shaped doom into guardians, had given them the cunning of hinges and sinew. Their faces were blank save for a single inlaid eye of amber, and their hands were like great clamps. For a moment they stood, as if recalling a charge that had lasted centuries. Aragorn moved to meet them. There was no fear in him. He had seen the world in its worst shapes and had loved it still. His blade whispered free, and the sword sang upon the warden's armor. When steel met stone, the sound was a small thing beside the deeper music. Lara leapt with a grace that made the others look twice, and with a steel-tipped bolt she threw the mechanism of one guardian's joint. It shattered cleanly, the part giving way with a noise like the fall of a brittle branch. The warden fell, and stone dust floated about them like the slow fall of ash from a sky long ago. "You are quick with iron," Gandalf observed, kindly this time. "You have the hands of one who has unmade many things to keep what she seeks." "I unmake to learn," Lara answered. "To find what you would not find by light alone." Gimli laughed, and the sound struck the corridor like a hammered note. "By Allah's beard," he said, "woman of the strange lands, if you bring such tools to my halls, I shall ask you to lead my kin to the forges." They pressed deeper. As they moved, the murals along the walls altered their impression. At first the figures seemed to be of kings and boats, of harvests and boundary stones. But the closer one looked, the more the scenes dissolved into a strange mingling. Faces with the hollowed eyes of men who had crossed the sea and did not return. Banners that bore not the usual emblems of house or crown, but the sigils of ships under a night no star remembers. At end of a long corridor, they came upon a vault whose arch bore a crescent of iron inlaid with an alloy whose sheen made the hair on a man's neck stand. Here the work was most deliberate, and the cavern's air had a taste of hush. In the center of the vault, upon a dais of black stone, lay a sarcophagus bound with iron bands. It was sealed not only with locks but with a band of dark metal where runes had been hammered firm. Around it lay small artifacts, knives and a cup, a child's toy carved from bone, and a pendant of a design entirely foreign, interlaced triangles encircling a small glass bead that reflected nothing. Frodo's hand, which had learned to feel the weight of whisper and worm, tingled as he neared. He did not step closer. He felt rather like a moth that has been shown a flame, and then told to keep its wings. Gandalf's shadow grew long upon the stone. He knelt, and his fingers, old and sure, brushed the flange of the sarcophagus. "What sleeps here is not simply a man," he said. "It is a memory of a making, and the making had purpose." Lara moved closer than any of them, crouching as she had inside tombs of other worlds, where the dead were not always the simplest guardians. With a small tool she pried beneath the iron band. The metal resisted as if conscious, humming faintly. It was then that the pale blue light about her answered in kind. The bead upon her collar, a small thing of rock and art, replied to the runes as if kin. For a breath she seemed to the others more a rune than a woman, device against device. And the sarcophagus sighed. A sound came then, not from within the stone but from the very bones of the earth, like the echo of something striking a drum in time with the heart. The lanterns quivered. From the distant galleries came a deeper clamor, voices, or the imitation of voices, chanting in a cadence old as sorrow. Boromir's hand tightened upon his horn. He lifted his head, proud soldier always ready to answer a call. Legolas' ears went still. His face held a shade of fear he did not name. Frodo felt the chord in him, the small tremor that spoke of temptation or doom, and he clenched his hands until his nails dug the flesh. "It calls," murmured Gandalf. "Something nearby has heard a key and wakes." Lara's eyes were bright. "There are places where the right note will wake the right thing," she said, "and there are places where waking is what you seek. But be wary you do not always wake what you intend at." That the circle of light around the sarcophagus began to pulse, like a heartbeat. The runes upon the band rearranged themselves in a pattern that caught the blue flame and redirected it. The bead in Lara's collar shivered like prey. The chant rose, and from the deeper bowels of the hall there issued a figure that was neither wholly man nor wholly shadow. It wore the remnant of a helm like a ring of seaweed, and in its hands it held a thing that shone not as steel but as a memory of steel. When it moved, the echoes did not answer in the world of the living. They answered in the small, tight places of dream spirits of the locked, or revenants of craft. Gimli asked, and his words were flung back by the stone. Aragorn stepped forward, and his voice was a blade of command. "Stand fast. We will not let forms of the past make slaves of us." The creature gave no heed. It advanced, not with hunger but with the single inevitability of a tide. Its face was a blank of old wood, its eyes two deep hollows that swallowed light. The fellowship arrayed themselves as one might stand before a storm, shield to shield, blade to blade. But Lara did not take a place among them. She crouched beside the sarcophagus and struck it with a quick blow that rang true. It was not violence, but the blow had intent. A note struck precisely where a seam met its mate. The creature paused, as if the sound spoke to something satisfied in it. Lara then produced a small crystal from her satchel and held it to the bead upon her collar. The two shone, and the light between them was a narrow, piercing column. The column cut the air like a thread. Where it touched the creature, the figure unmade itself, not with the scream of ruin, but with the sigh of metal being cooled. Its form collapsed into a heap of latticework and memory, and from within the lattice slipped a small cog, an object of such apparent simplicity that Gimli laughed aloud with a kind of savage happiness. He rolled the cog in his palm, and it clicked as if still imprinted with a geartooth of time. Gandalf's face, grave a moment before, relaxed as though a hard knot had been loosed. "It is a warding device," he said. "Not wholly evil. It was made to keep something safe, or to keep something out." We have met the city's locks. We must also meet its intent. Lara rose, her hands staining faintly with dust and the black of old metal. For the first time, a small smile touched her mouth, one that was not unkind. There are many locks in the world, she said, and many who wish to keep them forever closed. But there are doors that must be opened if we are to find the road ahead. They pressed on. As they moved farther into the halls, fragments of the past became less like relic and more like counsel. A mural showed a man with briars on his brow and an oar in his hand. Beneath him was carved a verse in a tongue that was familiar and not. Frodo read aloud, his voice small and exquisite in that place, and the words, when they were spoken, opened another fold of memory in the stone. The light about them widened, and the map inlaid in the floor took on a sheen as if touched by the sea. Lines that had been mute began to point, secret roads tracing themselves toward a river that none had thought to travel. It points to the east, said Aragorn, with a look that was both wonder and dread, to a valley that lies between places men spoke of as ruin and as refuge. Gandalf's eyes gleamed. Then the halls gave counsel, and counsel knows its price. It was then, as they crossed a threshold that smelled faintly of salt and of iron, that Frodo felt a pressure against his chest like a hand. It was not the ring, but an echo of its weight, a small dimming in the corner of his mind that spoke of loss, of roads closed to returning. He caught Gandalf's sleeve and looked up, and in that look there passed a pact. Once more they would walk through darkness together, and once more choices would be asked of them. Outside of the halls, the world held its breath. Within, the Fellowship bore lantern and sword and strange iron together, and behind them, in the gloom they had left, something watched with the patience of the old things. It did not move yet, but it sounded as if it were already thinking. The remnant halls had answered the key, and the key had been given by hands that belonged to another age. Whether that answer would be the opening of a blessed road or the knocking at a gate that should never be opened, none could yet say. They walked on, and the echo of their passage wrote itself upon the stone like a fresh rune.